60,000 civilians have fled in just 5 days. Jordan says it can't afford to take in more Syrian refugees.
We came from the city of Hama. It was struck by bombs and came under siege. We're pleading with Jordan and its king, hoping we are allowed to go through.
Airstrikes led by Syria's strongest ally, Russia, have gone on for at least 10 days. Rebel forces have been outpowered. Peace negotiations and on-and-off ceasefire deals with Russia followed. Previous ceasefire deals had been breached before.
Syrian regime forces launched an attack on the other side. So who made this agreement? The United States and Russia. They both have responsibility, and this needs to stop.
Dara was one of the last rebel-held areas in Syria, but symbolically, it's much more. It's here where the uprising against Syria's government began 7 years ago. Now its fate may have international implications.
It has a very important strategic value for Israel because it's about its northern border.
The UN warns the situation could turn into a humanitarian crisis. Many of those who've tried to flee now have nowhere to go. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Tamer Samadi has more from the border between Jordan and Syria.
We are at the crossing point separating Jordan's Al Ramtha and Daraa, which has been reeling for days under severe bombardment, forcing the displacement of tens of thousands of Syrians towards the border with Jordan. As you can see behind me, hundreds of Jordan's residents have flocked here, offering what they can to help the Syrian refugees. Jordanians have brought food items, medical supplies, baby milk. The situation is dire as large numbers of displaced Syrians, mostly women and young children, are flooding into the area. The UN reported more than 160,000 Syrians are stranded along the border with Jordan. The Jordanian government issued a statement to the effect that it is prepared to allow a humanitarian lifeline to be extended by the United Nations and international community to the Syrians. But it says it cannot afford to open the border for more refugees, as Jordan is now home to more than 1.5 million refugees. The government cited political, economic and security issues to stand behind its decision.
Now to the US, where large crowds turned out to protest against President Donald Trump's so-called zero-tolerance immigration policy. Thousands of people demonstrated outside City Hall in San Francisco, where an estimated 50,000 people marched in downtown Chicago. Some of them set up tents outside the field office of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, known as ICE, to demand the return of more than 2,000 migrant children who've been separated from their families. Musicians like John Legend performed in a call for action in Los Angeles. And Democratic Senator Maxine Waters last week called for members of the Trump administration to be harassed in public spaces. Protesters marched across the Brooklyn Bridge in the president's hometown of New York, while thousands more staged a demonstration outside the White House. Al Jazeera's Rosalind Jordan was there.
Tens of thousands gathered outside the White House on Saturday to condemn the Trump administration's policy of separating migrant children from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border.
They will never be the same, even if they are reunited. Their ability to think, to process, to trust others in future relationships is gone.
Donald Trump wasn't home to hear them. The people in the park didn't care. They are outraged by the video and photos of some 2,300 children, including babies, caged like animals in detention centers, and by the fact the government doesn't know where their parents are being held.
There's a lot of data that we don't know that we need from the Trump administration. They've got a list of parents, apparently they've got a list of children. They've got to be reconciled. We need to know where every parent is that matches up with every child, and they've got to tell us that in a publicly accountable manner. And I don't think they're going to feel compelled to do that unless there's public pressure.
Even though the Trump administration buckled to public pressure and stopped the forced separation of children from parents at the U.S.-Mexico border, it's now going to detain entire families, perhaps indefinitely, perhaps at military reservations across the U.S. That has rally-goers here in Washington fed up. And that's the sentiment being repeated at rallies across the United States. The signs and the messages were the same across the country. Obey international asylum law, protect children, stop the government's racist policies.
Honestly, the only reason our president is doing this is because of his ego. He has no excuse. These people aren't bad people. They are running away from their homes. That takes a lot. It must be big to make them do that.
Hopefully accomplish some sort of change in the policy that we have and really move our legislators to actually get something accomplished.
The challenge is taking the white-hot anger on a hot summer's day and turning it into political action. There's no guarantee people will do more than this, even though they say they will. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
There have also been protests on the Mexican side of the border. Thousands gathered to accuse U.S. authorities of turning asylum seekers into criminals. And they condemned President Trump's policies that have separated migrant children from their parents. It's election day in Mexico, and leftist Andrés López Obrador is the front runner. He's gained popularity because of promises to deal with violence and corruption. Many of the country's poorest citizens say they get little to no help from authorities when a family member is murdered. Our Latin America editor, Lucia Newman, reports from Mexico City.
Él es mi hijo Gerson. This is my son Gerson. He was 19 and studied architecture.
Marisela Orozco's mantelpiece is in fact a shrine to her two murdered sons, a place where she can at least keep their ashes close to her. 3 years ago, the eldest, Gerson, was kidnapped.
Tenía escasos 15 años cuando.
A few hours later, 15-year-old Alan, a football player, was murdered along with his brother-in-law in Veracruz, where they used to live. Even though the family paid the ransom to get Gerson back, he was never returned. Eventually, the remains of Marisela's eldest son were found in a mass grave, along with 190 other missing people.
I thought one day I would find Gerson. The only thing I have of him now is his skull and a piece of hip and leg, because those monsters chopped them all to pieces.
There's no peace for the families of the more than 30,000 Mexicans who were murdered last year, and the equal number who are still missing, records that are expected to be surpassed this year. But there is another type of crime that is also destroying Mexico. This is what's left of a school that collapsed during last September's earthquake here in Mexico City. And these little angels represent the 19 children who were crushed to death when a structure that was built illegally by the school's owner fell on top of them. She had apparently paid off local officials to turn a blind eye to the building code. The victims' parents say that they died not because of the earthquake, but because of corruption, a phenomena that is spreading like a disease throughout Mexico, impacting almost every aspect of life. Which is why confronting crime, violence, and the widespread corruption that makes those things possible are the main issues for tens of millions of Mexicans as they choose a new president.
One has to pay the criminals so that they let you work in peace. Sometimes it's the police that demands bribes. Corruption is everywhere.
The NGO Mexicans Against Corruption and Impunity says that corruption costs the poorest 35% of their income, putting poverty and violence in a vicious circle.
And when you start hitting the economy with those levels of violence and those levels of corruption, of course nobody's going to want to invest. And that's where you perpetuate and you have more inequality, more poverty, and of course, more crime.
There's neither a silver bullet nor a presidential candidate with serious proposals to turn the tide. And yet, like millions of Mexicans, Marisela hasn't given up.
Now there will be a new government, which has the power to do more. We hope this time things will change.
After losing so much, hope, she reminds us, is the last thing you can lose. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
Well, still ahead on Al Jazeera.
I have to be strong, but I wish my son comes out today.
A mother's anxious wait during the search for her 13-year-old son trapped in a cave in Thailand. And we take a look at the impact of the US tariff war on Canada, its industries and people.
Hello there. We've got plenty of showers over the southeastern parts of Asia at the moment. If we look at the satellite picture, we can see the showers generally start around the Philippines, then track down through parts of Borneo and eventually across Sumatra as well. So that's where we're seeing the wettest of the weather. And to the north and the south of that is where there's far more in the way of dry weather around and plenty of sunshine. So for us, across parts of Vietnam and towards the west over many parts of Thailand, it should be fine and settled. And also across Java, should be settled here as well. And that's what we're expecting over the next few days, staying dry to the extremities of our map and in the central patch. That's where we'll see lots of wet weather. Now, across Australia, we're also looking at some wet weather here, but this is edging in from the southwest. You can see it here, already a fair amount of cloud in the southwestern parts of Western Australia, and that area of wet weather gradually edges its way eastwards as we head through Monday and Tuesday. It will bring us some pretty stormy conditions. Some of us could see around 50 millimetres of rain and winds gusting over 90 kilometres per hour. So that could cause a few power outages here and bring down some trees as well. For the eastern parts, still cool here for many of us. Melbourne, no higher than around 13 degrees as we head through Tuesday. Warmer in Sydney, up at 18.
Eradicating leprosy in Cambodia relies on education and treatment in equal measure.
Found him very early, no disability. If we will be wait until 3 years or 4 years more, he will have disability.
Great news.
Okay.
And in Norway, the next generation of antibiotics may just be waiting at the bottom of the ocean.
Maybe this petri dish has it.
Let's hope so.
The Cure, revisited on Al Jazeera.
Watching Al Jazeera. Time to recap our headlines now. At least 75 civilians have been killed